Who wants to share anything or talk about anything today?
Um, Mike, I just wanted to find out about the conference on the 3rd.
Yeah.
Yeah, I haven't been song.
Okay. So, anyone else got anything they want to talk about or ask? I think Laura, you got your hand up there.
I have a question, Mike.
Yeah.
I've had on my mind quite a lot telekinesis to practice it. And I was wondering, I know there are people who receive gifts from God, and from one moment to the other, they are able, for example, this guy who was able to play all music instruments suddenly because he went to heaven and that's the gift God gave him. I was wondering for all other people, is it a good idea to practice in God's strength, obviously? Things like telekinesis and transmutation and creative thinking, things like that.
Yeah. I mean, you need a mandate to do it. So, I think the practicing comes with the mandate. So, I wouldn't practice something that I didn't have a mandate for. But there are general things that we have mandates for, which I think you can engage. So, I've done quite a lot of exercises recently with people practicing being translated. So being translated in time and space and used to facilitate God's purpose or answer someone's prayer anywhere in the world and anywhere in time as well. Now that's making yourself available and asking God then to release you into that. I don't think you can practice doing that as in, well, I'm going to relocate somewhere to do something. I think if you have a mandate for a particular area or a particular sphere of government, I think you can engage your spirit in that realm because you carry it in your heart and you can outwork your spirit towards that realm. But I've done a number of practice exercises which are more like, hey, let Jesus show you and take you and do this, in which people have had all sorts of pretty amazing encounters and testimonies of being used in time, space, and various places around the world, and rescuing people and engaging with people who've called out on God. And I mean, just amazing testimonies. I mean, and myself, I mean, I've had a number of encounters recently which have been very interesting in that I felt led to go to the Discovery House and bring out revelation plans, ideas, schematics for various things, and then go and drop them into people's minds, which is very interesting. Um, People who are inventors or people who are meditating, seeking for revelation about something particularly, that you can get that revelation and drop it into their minds, and those become the thoughts that fill their thinking. I mean, like Einstein, he described discovering the theory of relativity as like thoughts dancing in his mind. Well, where did those thoughts come from? Was he able to create them, which is possible, I guess, if you're connecting to what you know in the spirit outside of what you know in the rational mind, because you can't create something in the rational mind that actually doesn't really exist. You're discovering something that already exists in the laws of God, So the theory of relativity was essentially discovering something that God had established in creation. So you're reconnecting back to his heart and his mind. So this, I think, yeah, you can definitely do certain things. I think practicing telekinesis, in other words, moving something with your mind, how effective that is. If you have a mandate to do telekinesis, I guess you can practice. If you don't have a mandate for anything specific, I'm not sure how you would practice unless you ask God for one. Maybe you ask for a mandate so you can practice it. And then you're going to have to focus your thinking to move something. Now, there are various ways you could do that. And I don't know how telekinesis works. I know how I can choose a reality, and then that effectively brings that reality about, which may be affecting something being moved. Whether you can focus your thinking or your consciousness to move something or choose the reality that it moves, maybe it's just semantics. I don't know. I mean, it's not something I've really ever felt particularly led to do unless I needed to do it. You know, like opening a padlock which was locked. You know, I've done that. You know, opening a door with a key that no one else could unlock it with. Yeah, I've done that. The key was going round and round in circles for somebody, and I was able to actually use that key to unlock it. I've done that a number of times in different things like that, which I guess are, in a sense, using the conscious mind to begin to enable you to do something you couldn't do normally. You know, so yeah, I don't think there's anything wrong setting the heart's desire upon learning how to do those things, or asking Jesus to instruct you or give you insight or wisdom into how to do those things. And creative thought, you know, what is creative thought? Is it the power that a son has connected to the father to release something that's already within the heart of the father in a creative way, which comes out of our sonship? So creative thought could be, how am I going to heal this person? And the creativity to heal that person is unveiled. That could be a sense of creative thought.
No, the creative thought, there is a Dutch lady who came to visit us, and she was explaining that she lives in an apartment and she had 2 or 3 plants on her windowsill. And that one day she came and realized that the plants were dying because they were eaten by bugs. And she really cared about this plant, and they were lovely. And she found it so unfair that, you know, it will be destroyed so quickly by bugs. So she decided to go in the spirit, to go to heaven, and to create new plants, a new plant there. And basically, she just focused on it for as long as it took. And I think within an hour, or I'm not sure the time, but on that day, that plant appeared on her. She was able to take it back. I don't know. She said there was a plant, brand new, in her hands, which she was able to put on her balcony to replace the dead one.
Okay, yeah.
So a bit intrigued and said, do we need to practice? Do we need to setting our heart on it? It's our inheritance. We should be able to do it. But is it something God will just unlock one day, or is it something we need to practice? Because we have to practice going to heaven. We have to practice talking with, you know, anybody who is there, and develop our all our senses. We have to practice creative thinking.
Yeah, I think it's just a matter of seeing that creative thinking can be quite a broad thing, in that, you know, it can be not just creating something, but connecting to something. You know, sometimes it's like our sonship, I believe, will become co-creating, and therefore we will be able to create things because we're made in the image of God as creators. And maybe you get stirred sometimes to engage certain things, like, you know, you're moved because of a plant and creation is groaning, because that's decay and corruption. You know, therefore you can establish the restoration of that and change it. I never really thought about it in terms of what was Adam doing. Was there a natural degradation of plants, or did plants live continually and never die? Because there was no death. There's no death in heaven. So would they have actually gone through a cycle? It talks about having seed. So there would have been a cycle of producing seed. There were some seed bearing trees that produced seed that then produced new trees. So there was obviously an ability to form life from the natural sense that God built within seed time and harvest. But then how would that have worked? They ate fruit. So did that just grow more fruit? What would have happened if they didn't eat it? Would it remain perpetually ready to eat, or would it have fallen off the tree? These things are all sort of quite interesting things that open up a realm of questions, more questions than answers to ask. And it may be, you go back and ask Adam, and or ask Jesus to show you what went on. I think a lot of the mental abilities, we do need our mind rewired to connect to them. So they're there, latent within our consciousness, but we need to reconnect our thinking, to believe it. And maybe that reconnection forms when you start practicing. Maybe you start to reconnect to the ability because you desire it, and it will begin to unveil. If you're in any doubt, I think it's just to go in and, do I have permission to practice? Ask him, and what do I have permission to practice? Because there are certain things that I know how to do, but I don't have any desire to practice them, because it will be like, well, when I need to do them, I'll be able to do them. So I trust that I don't need to practice being able to walk through a wall, because when I need to walk through a wall, I will be able to control the frequency of my body to match the frequency of the wall and walk through it. So I know how to do it, but I never really thought about practicing or desire to practice it, because I feel, hey, when I need to do it, I can do it. But that's not to say that practice, as you do in other things, training your senses to discern. You can train your senses and focus them. I've never practiced doing anything like suspending time or doing any of those things. I've just done them. Now you could say that's practicing, because you have to start somewhere. But when I've done them, it's just happened. So it wasn't like, well, I failed and I practiced and maybe I can get better at it. I was just able to do it when I knew I had a mandate to do it, like change, the time of an airplane flight or do things like that. But I'm not saying that you can't practice. I think it's just, find out what he wants you to practice and go and ask him about it. I don't think I have an awful lot of time thinking about practicing stuff. I just do what I need to do, and I'm contracting and expanding time all the time to enable me to do what I want to do. So I guess it's sort of more of a if there are things outside of that. When I saw this from in my mind perspective, it was like there were areas of my mind that were not accessible, and they needed to be bridged. And therefore bridging them was something I needed to desire. And there's only a few of them. One was bridged by God to help me connect to being able to think non-linearly. And the other one was sort of an area I saw, which was the capacity to be able to connect thought to thought, or to read the intentions of people's hearts, which is obviously what Jesus was able to do. But I don't do that unless I feel really permitted to do it, because I think that would be a potential, for me, an intrusion on someone's space that I wouldn't want to do unless I felt really called to, or a mandate to do it. And I guess Jesus, when he saw what the Father was doing, he saw that the Father was giving him the ability to engage the thoughts and intentions of people's hearts. So yeah, plenty of interesting things there to engage with. So yeah, a lot of interesting fun. But I think the main thing is these things aren't party tricks to actually show off, are they? They're things that will demonstrate our sonship, that will either be no one else needs to see them, or when they do need to see them, it will bring them to focus on the sign where that points to, which is, this is an ability that I have in my relationship with God. Not that I'm sort of a superhero or Superman or something, but that in sonship we all have abilities to enable us to fulfill our destiny. Yeah. Okay, Chris, you got your hand up there?
Hi, Mike. Hi, everybody. Yeah, thanks. Lovely to see you all. We gained 10 minutes on our way to your church building, after the conference. The Tom sat nav said we're not going to get there before 15:15. Let me see, your meeting started at 30:30. It said we were going to get there at 11:15, something like that. And we didn't want to speed. We weren't speeding, weren't able to speed even if we wanted to, but we weren't. And the three of us just said, we should get there on time. And let's just believe for it. So we believed for it. And it was like at one moment, I would like going down the time tunnel in that old TV series.
Yeah.
And we got to your building for about just gone 25 past, I think it was. So we gained 10 or 15 minutes from somewhere, which wasn't possible. So that was just something in practice.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. I mean, I think it happens a lot now because people are beginning to believe it.
Mm.
A friend of mine, when I've just been back from Seattle, she was caught up in traffic, and that was not above average traffic. And normally the journey takes 45 minutes, and she did it in 11.
Wow.
And she said she couldn't sense. It was almost like she couldn't see where that. Oh. Now this is where. Well, was that that 11 minutes was actually 45 minutes? But was contracted to actually, that happened within. So essentially she traveled the whole way, but it was actually 45 minutes was contracted into 11. So it was actually only 11. And I think that's because it was like only once when I was relocated did I notice that I was in a different place. I couldn't sense anything, but I traveled around the corner, and it was like, I'm sure this isn't what's around that corner. And I found actually I was 7 miles down the road. So that was actually a trans relocation. And I noticed, so it wasn't a time contraction. It was actually me going from one place to another instantly, but I didn't feel anything. It wasn't like I could feel I was going through some tunnel. But then I guess if you're quantumly entangled and you come out and in, if all the atoms and of your particles and the car and everything else goes out of phase and then back into phase somewhere else, you wouldn't really necessarily feel it because it's done in a fraction, Planck's constant, which is the smallest amount of time that can exist. So you become non-local and local within, it is I think it's 1/20,000th of a billionth of a second. Mm-hmm. So it's a pretty small instant. So I think there's lots of different ways, I guess, this can be done. And that was definitely trans-relocated was moving in a different place, but actually traveling, in time. I took my daughter to catch a train a few weeks ago. And we were traveling to Tiverton, which was about 35 miles, and it usually takes 45 minutes or so. But I allowed an hour, and we actually got about a mile or so up the road, and there was some traffic lights, and there was a 3-mile tailback. So it took us best part of 40 minutes to get through it. So after 40 minutes, we'd only really gone a few miles. So my daughter was like, "Oh, we're going to miss the train. I can't get my tickets are fixed tickets, so I can't use it on another train." So I'm like, "Okay, don't panic. Let's see. Let's just see." So we just carried on driving and carried on driving. And it got to the point where we had 7 miles to go and 3 minutes. And we actually got there in 2 minutes to spare. Wow. But it appeared like I drove that whole 7 miles. So the time it took me must have gone from normally that 7 miles, that sort of traffic would have probably been somewhere around 12 minutes, something like that, 10 to 12 minutes. And I was able to do it in a minute. So that time must have been contracted from 10 minutes to that 1 minute. That's the only explanation I can give, because I didn't feel, and nor did she feel, that we were in any sort of bubble or any sense, but we traveled the whole time, but we got there with 2 minutes to spare. And it was just, there wasn't any logical answer to it, other than, we didn't just go 7 miles in a minute. in a sense of being relocated. So we must have actually done some sort of time issue where, you know, that was a contraction of that time, because it felt like I was driving that time normally. It just felt like it. But in reality, I know I couldn't have been. So that's sort of the way in which but I was totally at peace about it.
Yeah.
And I had to sort of maintain the peace in spite of my daughter's sort of getting fearful. You know, and sometimes you have to do that to maintain the government of it in that sort of light. But yeah, a number of people have sort of had similar testimonies of, you know, being able to travel in different times. So.
My question, even though this is lovely, I mean, it relates to this. It's about sonship. I noticed that, you know, on the diagrams, and my understanding is that there's lordship, kingship, and then sonship is like a higher level of maturity. So it's on the responsibility pathway. It's not what we talk about when we're talking about being sons and daughters of, you know, is our daddy on the relationship, the intimacy pathway. But sonship, how does that work? And how do you become mature as a son?
Well, it is in a sense, we're all sons, you know, we're all sons and daughters, you know, it's a generic term for being a son and having a position of a birthright in an inheritance, you know, because the firstborn son inherited, and there was a birthright attached to it, and there's a sense of our sonship is relationally there for everybody, but in the maturing into a position of authority, there is a sense where we go from lordship, kingship to sonship, and that lordship is where we are faithful to begin to administrate the things in heaven, perform his charge, his service, in other words, the things he directs us to do. And so Zechariah 3:7, sort of a whole process there. And I think we get to lordship through friendship. We go to a deeper level of intimacy and realize how much God loves us in a friendship, and that unveils the next step, which is now you can be seated in Christ in heavenly places, actually seated rather than being there in him, you know, which is our position, but are we actually in the position? You know, it's a position which is maintained for us to occupy, but we obviously have to consciously engage it and then begin to function in it. So that position gives us the authority then in lordship, and therefore we're given mandates, we're given things that we can do, and we do them under the king's authority. He delegates that authority to us. When you then are faithful with that, I found that was the limit I could go to without soul and spirit being separated. I could not go, it was a ceiling. I could not go beyond that. Because I don't think he could trust me to go beyond that, because I was still using my experiences to validate my identity. So when that got dealt with and soul and spirit was separated, reintegrated, I was untethered and I could live in dual realms, and therefore I could go beyond. Because what I found was what I was then called to do beyond as a king, to make legislation, use legislation in a higher level of authority, that gave me access to other places, other roles. I was given the Chancellor's seal. That access enabled me to access different places I couldn't access before. It's like having a key card to some place. And, you know, certainly in a company, there are key cards are basically given out to the juniors, and then you get key cards given out to, and then eventually, you know, key cards will give you access to everywhere. And it seemed that I was given an orb, and that orb represented the realm in the kingdom of heaven that operated. And then I had access to the Chancellor's Court and the Court of Scribes. And I then began to use that and to engage the Court of Kings. It was all part of that maturing process. And as I was faithful in doing what I was shown and then using what I was shown, then I got shown more. And then I was given access to stand in some of the councils of God. It's like present a case to the Council of 70, engage the Court of Judges, engage the Court of the Law, the Yesod. So I then found that, again, then that gave me other roles, you know, and it's not like that you're better than anyone else. It's just like you're given a role and you then begin to function in that role. And I guess we've all got different roles associated with our destiny that we need to begin to come into. But it is by being faithful with what you have got and not getting frustrated with the limitation of that, but having the desire just to mature. And the mature process comes through engaging wisdom. 7 spirits of God are involved in that. The cloud of witnesses seem to be involved in helping in some aspects of maturity. That was my journey with it. You know, and I can map out that journey and see what God did now looking back. You know, when you're in it, it's not as easy to see because you're in the midst of the experience and the encounter or the season that you're in. And you look back and you can see those seasons were maturing seasons.
I know that I'm in kingship because I've written laws and I have a seat in the Court of Kings. But I get the impression sonship is about another level.
Yeah.
And I don't understand that. I just know it's something that I think about a lot.
Yeah, I mean, for me, it was a matter of when I began to make legislation, begin to use legislation, engage the chancellor's houses, start to see how all that worked, start to connect to the position within the tree of life, you know, sort of being within the tree of life, being within the Metatron's cube, being within as a son, and being a son of light, which is part of holding everything together. It's like, you know, everything's held together by the voice of his power, but he spoke us into being and we carry the energy of that creation. And therefore we are part of the fabric of creation itself. And our role in light and bringing light back to darkness and various things is all part of that. And so once I started to engage the chancellor's courts and began to understand and experience the precepts, statutes, laws of God, which opened up the ordinances of God, then that gave me an invitation to come. So I was given an invitation to come and stand. And I remember the first time I was given an invitation to come and stand, it was in February 2000 and somewhere or other. I can't remember the exact date now, but and I came and stood there and it was just overwhelming. You know, I didn't know I couldn't breathe. It was like the atmosphere was different. I didn't know how to breathe. It was like it was so light I couldn't really focus until my eyes got accustomed to it. And then I first saw these courts and I sort of observed. And then, you know, it was like, oh, this is a bit much. I felt so I didn't feel ready. And I said, no, I'm not ready for this. You know, I'm not ready for engaging this level of court. So I didn't feel mature enough. So then I then was asked to prepare a case. So that preparing that case matured me in that it took 18 months, you know, of getting ready, of understanding how to prepare a case and based on how the precepts, statutes and laws of God work together and all that stuff. And eventually, when I went before the court, wisdom took me. I asked for an introduction. Wisdom took me because she's there to help us rule and to mature into those positions of government. I eventually stood there feeling not comfortable, but feeling I could engage, and I was mature enough to be able to present the case. And having presented the case, I was then given something else, which was the role of an ambassador to come before that court. So I have the right to come before that court whenever I want to represent the Joshua generation, which is what I'm an ambassador of. So that I was given like a crystal that looked like the shape of the tree of life. I can't remember what the actual shape is, but it's like, you know, an elongated thing with a point on each end. So how many points is that? 2, 4, 6. So is that a septagon or something? 6? Not sure. Yeah. So was that 7? I don't know. Whatever a 6-sided thing is,
Hexagon.
Hexagon, is it? Yeah. So it's a hexagon. That effectively was, I was given this crystal which was symbolic of the tree of life shape within Metatron's cube, and I can go, and that gives me access. But it was a long maturing process of step by step, just exploring, learning, engaging, and then being sort of introduced bit by bit into it all, which took me a long time. I mean, I guess if I'd really focused my whole attention on it in a short period of time, I could have speeded that up. But I did this alongside all the other things I was doing, so I didn't feel any need to rush. It was like, okay, I don't want to rush maturity, because maturity comes through a process, and if you sort of jump the process, then you can end up actually not being mature, but just knowing how to do something. And therefore, knowing how to do something and being mature enough to do it are two different things. And I think it's dangerous to try and use a little bit of knowledge without the maturity that comes with the process that enables you to be able to use that knowledge wisely with some wisdom as well. So I think, God wants to mature everyone. So I think if we're set our heart towards it and surrender to it, be living sacrifices, and hey, do whatever you want with me. I'm open for this maturing process, and I'm going to continue to be faithful in what I know I've been given to do. Then I'm sure that process will be carried out, and you will grow and find yourself operating in some of those things. And you may get forerunner experiences which prime you for it. I did have a number of forerunner experiences which were sort of primers, that then it wasn't completely out of the blue. It was something which was, oh yeah, I've been here. Now I'm going to learn how to engage this. So you may have some experiences like that. I had lots of them, over a period of time, lots of different encounters which I couldn't really put together or go back to. Although I tried, it wasn't something I could just jump back into it. It was part of, okay, when you get here, you will have had some experience of this, therefore it won't be totally unfamiliar. That's what it felt like my process was like. But of course, other people's processes may be different. So,
Is it possible to summarize, sentence, sonship is? Because say lordship is, kingship is, but sonship in this context is what? It's obviously
I think it's knowing your identity and being in the position to be able to stand in the councils and assemblies of God and be part of the decision-making processes of heaven. That would sort of sum it up for me, but that's just my experience of it. And I think it goes with the, this is Zechariah 3:7, you have access to stand amongst those who are here in this sense. And I think for me, that goes beyond just the court, which originally it was talking obviously in the first 6 verses, to if you, because it's all, if you will walk in my ways, if you will. So they're all based on something that you have done that then gives you access to something more, rather than you can jump from, hey, here's something you can just jump into because you can. It's if you will walk in my ways, keep my charge, rule the house, charge of the courts, then you will have access to stand here. It wasn't sort of you can just jump from number 1 to number 5 and you're there. For me, that was not my experience. And I think it's a process of learning and maturing in it. When you get to be involved in some of those things, you have to think differently. So the deconstruction of my mind and the not sort of dealing with the non-linearity of my thinking that enabled me to function from the heart of God, which is the sort of a perpetual now, meant that what you can bring into a decision is coming out of God's intention for that, to bring a realignment to it or to bring creative power into it. So it's like, if you are engaging in that place, you're standing in what is within the 4 faces of God, in the name of God, then you have the ability to begin to align things out of God's desire rather than looking at all the things which are out of focus and bringing them back into some sort of order. And that involves writing our stories within the overall narrative. So there's a macro narrative, or which is the grand narrative, the big picture of God's intention for everything in creation. And then we've got lots of little micro narratives, which are our story involved in it. And they get woven into it. They don't get expunged. They get woven in, and then they get seen from a different place. Like, if you look at David from an Old Testament perspective, you see a lot of things he did weren't, necessarily the best choices. But you look at him from a New Testament perspective, and it's like he's a man after God's own heart who served the purpose of God in his generation. And there's no mention of any of those things because they've already been dealt with, but they're still woven into the story because they've been not expunged from the record. We just see them from a grace perspective and the cross perspective rather than and I think David described the difference between, sacrifices and offerings you want not, but a contrite heart or a contrite spirit, broken spirit, which is a surrendered spirit, is what you're looking for. And you won't deny that. And I think David was really the man who was living out of the future with that revelation. Where can you go from my presence? I can't go, my spirit, you can't go anywhere. I go here, I go there, I go into Sheol, you're there. I go to the highest, you're there. And he had revelation experientially, which I think was way beyond anyone else that I know of in that old economy. And he seemed to be living out of the revelation of the new, but still having to function within the old. And it's like, having created David's tabernacle and open worship and had amazing encounters, everyone in the presence of God, he then put the ark in a temple, which was like, or he instructed Solomon to do it, and some of it was just like, okay, this is a bit of a conundrum of why you would even want to do that, but because it was out of sequence, because he was living out of a new covenant in the old covenant, and therefore I guess the new covenant wasn't ready to be unveiled in that season. So he had to therefore go through the process, but he demonstrated something, which then, in Acts 15 is like, okay, this is what this restoration of David's tabernacle is. This means everybody is now able to participate in the good news, not just a limited number of people in Israel, and that was a dramatic change. Because no matter what Jesus did to tell them that they were going to go from Jerusalem and Samaria and Judea to the ends of the earth, they still didn't get it. They were still limiting the dimension of the cross until Peter has this dream, and the sort of the visitation, he goes into the trance type of thing. And there's, and then they're like, okay, the revelation was, this is David's tabernacle restored. This is bringing back what David glimpsed and brought into the old from the new. Now we can experience this in the new, so the gospel is open. And then they threw a bit of their own invention in there, which they did, because it was like, well, if you don't do this and don't do this, so don't upset anybody, basically. Where Paul just ignored that and went and did what he was going to do anyway. So yeah, I think it is a process of maturing.
And Romans 8, creation is crying out for the freedom of the glory of the sons of God. I take it that that's what we're talking about, mature sons who are able to answer creation's groan.
Yes.
Bring it back into.
Yeah.
So that really is a goal for the whole church, isn't it? For the whole body of Christ, because how are we going to do it unless we have a mature
body? Yeah. Oh, totally. Yeah. I mean, that to me is why we are here, to bring everything to restoration, which will answer the decay of corruption. But the amazing thing is, it's into the freedom of the glory of our sonship.
Yeah.
Not God's glory, because he has given us to be in his image and made in his likeness, and therefore creation is to respond to us. Creation responded to Adam before he chose to walk his own path. Now Jesus has brought that back so we can rediscover that pathway and walk it out now. But it does require maturity, you know, and without that maturity, just imagine if creation would respond to our every whim of immaturity. It would be chaos. You know, it would be. I mean, even if everything you ever said came to pass and everything it would be chaos, because I've said some pretty stupid things in my life, you know, and so there's a limit to the level of authority that we actually operate in that is metered by the level of maturity or holiness that we walk in, or the level of representation of God, you know, in us. So our sonship, you know, is to represent who we are as sons of God, which ultimately will point people to God himself. But we are sons of God. And in a sense, Jesus sort of throwed the thing out there. That's actually, you are God's. Little g, but you are God's. I mean, if you're a son of God, then you must be a God, you know, in a little g way, that we're supposed to be sons who carry the abilities to do the things he did.
Godling was a good little word.
Yeah, well, yeah, I guess so. You know, and it says, you know, we have all things pertaining to life and godliness.
Yeah.
So that actually living that out in the godly expression of that character and nature of God himself, which is love. Ultimately, Jesus summed it up even shorter than that. You know, love, basically. Love like you've been loved. So love, be loved, and love. You know, and I think if you do that, and if we all did that, then creation would soon start to respond. You know,
the ultimate groan in Paul's passage there is, it talks about we groan and desiring the hope of our salvation, which is the redemption of the body.
Yeah.
Now, again, is that all future, or is that something that is potential? Do we have?
I don't think it's a future at all. I think it should be an ongoing maturing where we will not need to die. I think that's what Jesus said: eat my flesh, drink my blood, you don't need to die. And I think that was always God's intention, because Adam wasn't supposed to die. So if we're supposed to be restored to pre-fall Adam, and then into the intention that comes out with, then death is not part of the deal. So yeah, I think we do need to learn how to live life in its fullness, which means, yes, the redemption of our body, in that it's not going to be decaying either. Because how can we bring creation into the freedom from its bondage or decay to corruption if our body is still decaying? You have to have authority to be able to do something in creation that it's happened in ourselves. Otherwise, we don't have the authority.
Do you have any modules on this? Because this would be really neat to be.
Well, I mean, I've got some
really
stuff,
nasty
obviously.
cold. I had a really nasty cold for 2 weeks, and I really was surprised because I had a cold for several years.
Yeah.
And it was like a double whammy. It came back twice. And no matter what I did, I did loads of stuff, it just didn't seem to make a difference. And I'm thinking, well, you know, what am I missing here? What is something?
Yeah. And sometimes, sometimes it can be complicated, you know, in that, you know, if you come up against a natural virus, then your body has to be able to either defend itself from that virus or fight that virus, or you have to be able to be immune from that virus. And I think that requires the knowledge that you are immune to the virus, you know, that you live in that, you know, out of that knowledge. And sometimes there can be an attack. So the enemy tries to throw you a curveball, and if you don't recognize it's an attack, then you can deal with it as it's something else, and then not deal with it as in, no, I can rebuke this attack. So I think there's different ways of dealing with different scenarios, and I think it's discerning which scenario it is that you're having to deal with in any one situation. But it is a process of growing, so that, you know, Jesus said the enemy has nothing in me. Yeah. And I think then he described it as then having the Spirit without measure. And I think we have the Spirit to the measure that the enemy has nothing in us. But he may have some stuff still in us that we have to deal with, so that we get an increased capacity to take on that measure. And that requires generally renewing our minds. It is actually believing about ourselves what God believes about us, rather than what any of our conditioning might be, and therefore the renewing of our mind not to be conformed to the world, which essentially, not to be conformed to the world. That whole thing there actually meant that the world was aeon, not cosmos, and aeon was a period of time. So it actually was talking about do not be conformed to this system within this time. So the old covenant. So now live in the new covenant. So I think we really do need to grasp what this new covenant life is about so we can live in it. Otherwise, we'll always be living out of the past, out of an old, and that's what the whole system is. The whole religious system is designed to get you back under the old covenant. And therefore you're having to earn or work for it or sacrifice for it or go through the rituals of the old covenant rather than the freedom that's in the new. And I think it's quite subtle sometimes how that is influenced, because Jesus warned, beware of the leaven of Herod and the Pharisees, political and religious spirit. And wherever the old covenant's in operation, you'll find the leaven of Herod and the Pharisees there somewhere in the midst.
Which modules were you going to mention? Sorry, I cut in.
Well, I think I covered some of that in the transformation series way back when I looked at using communion and dealing with generational issues. Now, I would probably go into it a little bit in more depth now from, the perspectives of where I am now. But yeah, those original things about preparing, I think, definitely this separating soul and spirit, dark cloud is a key part of that in terms of a season of preparation for maturity and being able to live in dual realms. Obviously, when I get onto the sort of pathway of responsibility, which is I'm going to start soon after one more session, then I will look at being a living sacrifice. And I think that's really the continual process of being a perpetual sacrifice that can be continually being renewed and restored and made whole, that is the foundation for all the government. And they run sort of parallel. The inside out transformation of our spirit, soul, body to bring a flow of life and the gateways and all those things go along with the motives of the heart and the other layers of things that need to be dealt with when you're a living sacrifice and you're peeled open or you're skinned or your head's chopped off and you're no longer thinking in an old way, and you're not walking in an old way. So all that process is a continual thing. I live on the altar, because it's one of the places I want to perpetually be, so that there's always fire from the altar able to refine and purify and bring me into a level of holiness that is part of that journey. And so it's a conscious decision. I made conscious choices. I do not want to do my own will, so I surrender it. I'm not sure anyone's got free will, really. I think everyone's got a choice, but that choice is influenced by something, and we want our choices to be influenced by what's coming out of the heart of God, rather than what's coming out of our own heart or out of any other brokenness or trauma or anything else that might be influencing us. So there is a process of being restored so that we're actually coming out of the heart of God ourselves.
Thanks, Mike. That was excellent. Thanks very much.
Okay, who had their hand up next? Okay, well, Patrick hasn't had a go yet. So let's Patrick, you got anything you want to?
Hi, everyone. I just wondered if I could run something past you. It always seems to help if I can do that. Basically, the last couple of days, I've been through a process of going to court and restoring my scroll, eating my scroll, and then lots of things are happening around me recently. And I went swimming with my son, and they were blasting this music out, and it was really unmentionable words. And I thought, what should I do about that? But it was insinuations. And then last night we were watching Top of the Pops archive, and there's a very famous song, probably everyone would recognise it, called Brown Sugar. And I felt God saying, well, come on, why don't you do something, just sit there and watch it. And I looked up the meaning of it, and actually the lyrics are quite horrific. They're actually glorifying, well, not only heroin, but also, you know, taking black slaves and using them for sexual indulgences. And it is quite specific, and there's even a interview with Mick Jagger admitting that's what it was. And so when I woke up this morning, I just immediately wrote this email that I'm planning to send. I've just drafted it. You know, just saying, you know, basically, you know, what on the using the laws that exist in the land. Is there anything that can be done about this? And, you know, I don't know anything. It's probably just the start of something, but I feel like it's on my scroll, something to do with rock music. The fact, you know, I mean, I used to play in a band, and we played these songs. I played it on the guitar in my teen years. You know, I used to play in pubs and stuff. So maybe that's something to do with it. But I've taken it to God, and I've taken it to the court. I just wondered if you had any advice, or if you've come across anything like this yourself.
Mike, you're muted.
Yeah. There's a lot of songs which potentially carry that effectively negative things. Golden Brown by the Stranglers is another one that's heroin abuse. There's several other very, very famous songs which are actually written about that whole thing, and therefore it's like, if you have a mandate to deal with that, you got to be clear what it is, you know, because there are different mandates. You could have a mandate to mitigate the effect of songs within culture to affect people, so you're shielding or helping to stop the effect of songs. If you want to do legislation which is to bring about the end of those songs, then you're going to have to, that's going to have to be sort of a totally different level, because you'd have to do that in actual government.
Yeah.
And that would require a huge shift of government as it stands. Freedom of speech, it would really sort of, you know, so I'm not sure, unless you can change the whole government, which then creates even bigger problems, because then freedom of speech is actually removed from us to say that that's wrong. And so at the moment we've got freedom of speech to actually say that these songs are glorifying this, and actually we need to be careful about them. If you remove the right of free speech, then you would potentially actually stop what you have the right to do now. But I think spiritually, we can definitely legislate for the effect that certain culture has to be removed. And there's one of the chancellor's houses called the House of Culture,
Right.
and it's designed. Within it, there's the capacity to begin to affect how culture can change within a generation, and it can, you know. But you have to you have to access that court, and then you have to use the different things that you engage in that court to begin to facilitate that change of culture. So I would sort of suggest with the let's look, do we have a mandate? Do you have a mandate to actually remove the effect that has in culture?
Yeah.
So that almost like whenever anyone listens to that song, it gets blocked. There's a blockage in the mind which veils it. Because if the enemy can veil our eyes, the eyes of our heart, to stop the truth, then why can't we blind the eyes of people to not receive the enemy's truth?
Yeah.
The enemy is only counterfeiting something. So his ability to deceive people and blind people, well, then we should be able to have the ability to enlighten people, but also to protect people by shielding their minds from the effect of all sorts of culture. And it's obviously not just songs. Obviously there's movies and books and all sorts of things which potentially can effectively bring something negative into culture. And maybe you can get a mandate for that.
Because I was thinking, you know, in the case of Gary Glitter, his music got a lot of airplay until he was, you know, found out to be a paedophile, and now it won't be played anyway. You won't hear his music anywhere. But it obviously that had to be contested. So,
I see what you're saying there, but that's an exposing of things.
Right.
And I think we're in a time where lots of things are being exposed in the physical realm because we are administrating in the spiritual realm. So all the things with the abuse of in the football field, you know, that whole area that came to the light. In the music industry, the film industry, you know, the abuse and all that stuff came into light. The stuff in schools and public schools with beatings and stuff came into the light.
Yeah.
And therefore, then they become something which then that turns culture around because no longer is it acceptable. Yeah. You know, and you only got to go back. You know, some of it talks about political correctness, but if you go back to the 60s and 70s and watch some of the TV that was on then, like Alf Garnett and you know, sort of whole love thy neighbor, the racist issues that were just totally normal comedy on TV. Well, you'd be jailed if you put that stuff on TV now. So there's stuff which is actually no longer acceptable because I believe that we are beginning to administrate, and that is actually changing culture itself. You know, and it essentially then begins to gain momentum. So those things are no longer things. I mean, you know, I read an article in which Natalie Wood, who was a troubled lady, was basically raped at 16 continually by some casting director, but was afraid and told her mother, but they were afraid to say anything in case it ruined her career. So she traded that whole thing wrongly for position and power, and was willing to hide all that rather than bring it into the light. And therefore it's now, you know, that would have been way back in the, I don't know, 30, 40, 50s maybe. So, you know, that's now another 60 years on. And now those things are coming out into the light and things are being shared, which now, so this is no longer an acceptable part of this industry.
Yeah.
You know, and even some big actors, you know, Kevin Spacey and others, again, you know, things now, which Netflix, they didn't sort of defend the guy. They basically said, okay, we're taking his stuff right off and he's no longer going to be involved in this major TV production. You know, so you find that there is a change taking place. And I do believe that's because people are legislating for the things coming into the light. Because what is the light? It's us. Yeah. And the more we rise and shine, the less can be hidden in darkness. And therefore, the effect of some of these things, whether they be subliminal or, you know, glorifying stuff, will again become something potentially which is then seen as, well, we don't want this anymore. You know, we don't want things which is going to damage society in any particular way. But it takes a momentum. And I think we're on that scale of beginning to bring things into a light that we're shining. Now we've got to start shining that light as sons of God, not religious zealots, because the religious zealot of you can't do this because it's all wrong and blah, 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 it just gets laughed at because it's not coming with any sense of authority. And when we start administrating from a place of authority, things begin to be unveiled. I mean, the public school system in this country is a, you know, very traditional thing that's gone back hundreds and hundreds of years. So to bring into the light the beatings and the abuse within that system, and then to begin to change that culture so that that is no longer acceptable within that system, is a major influence to the nation. Because those are all the people who end up in government.
Exactly.
I mean, and they're all broken. A lot of them are broken people, and they or debauched people, or people of less than good morals, let's say, in governmental positions who do not carry, therefore, the heart of God because of their brokenness. So by changing the educational system, you can affect the culture of the generation or the next generation. And I think, this is all part of people who feel called to this sort of mandate. That's the sort of way I think they really need to start looking at it. How can we change the culture of the next generation by dealing with things in this generation, which will begin to bring things into the light that we are radiating, and that's going to need a huge change in the sons of God radiating light rather than, placarding things and telling people they're all wrong.
Yeah, absolutely.
It's got to be a totally different way of administrating it.
So is it something, you mentioned the house of culture, is that, this is some teaching we can look at, is it like effectively a court in heaven?
It's one of the chancellor's houses and is accessible to those who can access it. So all I can say, I had to be given a seal to access it. Wisdom opened it. You can set the desire of your heart on it. I've just done some teaching in our latest Engaging God. In the conference, Sons of Rise conferences, on the 12 chancellor's houses and how they function and engaging them. So it's something of a level of maturity. You need to be able to access it and then use the wisdom that you gain from there in a particular way. But there may well need to be, people are doing high level court cases at the Council of 70 in class action cases. This is why some of these things are affecting media and culture around the world, because they're not just dealing with this little, here in the UK or here in my city or whatever. They're actually doing it on behalf of all creation. And they have the authority with a high level action. And some people I know who are doing that. I have done that myself in a very specific, limited way. And I know others who are continually doing that. And I believe we're seeing the result of that, outworked in culture, that some things are becoming less and less acceptable. And also some of the, sadly to say, in one sense, some of the icons of that are dying out and are being removed. And I think some of the people who are dying young are because of their refusal to embrace the light, and therefore their effect on culture is being limited. And so even that, there's a limit placed on certain things. And that's why some people, and you got recently a whole spate of people who are dying in the rapper field and in other fields of music and other things, who I think have opened themselves up to the enemy, but in the way, not the way that they thought. But also I think some legislation will remove things from play, and they choose to follow a path which is going to lead to death ultimately. Now, Jesus is obviously wanting us to follow a path that leads to life, and obviously life can still conquer death, even should they die at a young age. But ultimately, I think this is the power of legislation. And I think that's why we need a maturity and a wisdom to use it in love, not out of judgment or retribution or revenge.
Yeah, absolutely.
So, yeah.
Thanks.
Okay, anyone else got anything they want to throw in before we go?
Hello.
Hi, Virginia.
I just have a short question to what you shared in the beginning. How long did it take you to build these bridges? Was it like a longer process?
How long to go through what? Didn't quite hear.
To build these bridges, you mentioned in the beginning.
Okay, in my mind, yeah.
Yeah, in the mind, yeah.
Yeah. It was a 2-year process of deconstruction, in that process, God started to begin to renew things and show me the bridges that were there. And then he formed a bridge which was part of the renewal of my mind process and rewiring of my mind process. And then I saw other areas, and I've re-engaged myself with one of those areas, but I've not really felt at this stage to go and pursue any more. But I know that when I do, you have to walk to that path and then be able to create the path. So being able to use your mind to create things in your mind, which is a bit of a conundrum, is part of it. So you have to have the authority to use creative thought, creative consciousness to establish things. So to create the reality where these bridges form.
Yeah.
He's not just going to form them. He formed one for me and then took me into the place where I know how to choose for the others to be created, but I've not felt led to go back other than once to do it. So when I do, I no doubt go back there and start forming some bridges which will, reconnect other areas of my consciousness to begin to function in certain ways. I don't think there's a set time, because everyone's different and everyone has different
Just to have an
things to
idea.
be deconstructed, really. And I as a forerunner, I tend to be thrust into it in a way which sort of is quite challenging. That deconstruction process was hugely challenging. And not everyone necessarily will want to be challenged in that intense way, and they may be more of a gentle process, perhaps, unless you really want to throw it open and invite God to come in and be the great iconoclast and smash down some of these things that we built up or have been built up in our mind that frame God in a wrong way. So it can be a speeded up process, and I guess the more people share it, the more people can engage it. I mean, when I do the last intensive this year, it's on the deconstruction and restoration, renewal of the mind and expanding consciousness, because I think that's ultimately what sons will have to be able to do and function in and engage in and use to be able to bring creativity into bear, in what we're doing in sonship. So we do need the mindsets dealt with, and we do need to have a reconstructed, rewired mind. I took communion, and I've got the communion prayers, which is about renewing the mind to begin to speed that process up and to embrace the process in my own life. So
I'm also practicing. So in other words, a bridge would be like a neuron path. Would you say it like this, or is it?
I guess, if you're thinking about it from a brain perspective, then you're thinking of neural pathways that connect synapses and take you to a particular area. If you're thinking about it in consciousness, it's more like an ability of the mind that once you've established, then your neural pathways form to that ability, which then gives you access to it. So I think it's difficult to form a pathway to something you haven't experienced or know. It's like a trauma, you form a pathway to it, but it's something that happened to you. The same thing, you need an encounter, and that experience is what then you can begin to form the connection to. And the more you engage it, the stronger that pathway becomes, until you are then triggered to use that pathway by life. So when I'm faced with here's an impossible situation, I don't have impossibility within my thinking anymore. So here's an opportunity for me. Therefore, I need to choose realities which align to the opportunities rather than are obstructed by the impossibilities, which is all part of having our minds renewed to be able to think like God does, and not to be functioning out of any old ways of engaging. So it's a process of definite deconstruction, renewal, and reconstructing our consciousness and expanding our beliefs. You know, we're generally limited by what we believe. So our consciousness needs to be expanded by encounter. It won't be expanded by people talking about it. I can tell you about my experiences, and they may stimulate you to go and get your own, but my experiences won't expand your consciousness. They well just may make it possible that your consciousness can be expanded, because mine has been. So, you know, but everyone needs their own encounters to be able to facilitate that. But the more you pursue it, you know, the more those encounters begin to take place. You know, and it's like, you know, you blow up a balloon, it never goes back to its original shape. So once you have encounters, they may create some cognitive dissonance, which then challenges the beliefs. But if you can embrace the encounter, then the beliefs will change, and you will have an expanded view rather than a limited one.
Thank you. It was helpful.
Okay. Okie dokie. All right. Okay. Well, I'm going to leave it there. Got so.